The idea of slowing a fall through the air had emerged long before any balloon rose over Paris. In the late 15th century, sketches by Leonardo da Vinci showed a pyramid-shaped canopy that, he suggested, could allow a person to jump from great heights and survive. These remained only drawings, but they captured a new way of thinking. Air, once seen as empty space, could be used as a medium to resist gravity and control descent. By the late 18th century, experimenters turned such concepts into crude devices. Early parachutes resembled oversized umbrellas or fabric cones, tested with animals or weighted dummies dropped from towers and balloons. The limits of these trials became clear in 1783, when a French inventor attached a canvas canopy to a dog and released it from a modest height, observing that drag alone could slow a fall. Still, no one had yet proven a human could trust life to such an apparatus. The leap from theory to fatal risk occurred in 1785. Jean-François Pilatre de Rosier, a pioneer of balloon flight, attempted to cross the English Channel using a hybrid craft, a hydrogen balloon above a hot air balloon. He planned to descend safely with a parachute-like system if needed. Instead, the volatile hydrogen ignited, and the balloon crashed near the French coast, killing de Rosier. The tragedy etched a chilling association between experimental descent devices and death, casting a shadow over future parachute ambitions. The story of the parachute often traced its roots to a single visionary mind in Renaissance Italy. In Milan, sheets of paper lay filled with mirrored handwriting and careful sketches. Among anatomical studies and flying machines appeared a peculiar pyramidal tent of linen. Notes around it described a man suspended beneath a four-sided canopy, supported by rigid poles, drifting safely from heights that would otherwise have been fatal. On the folios of the Codex Atlanticus, this strange object took clearer shape. The drawing showed a square base and converging lines meeting at a point, like a small fabric pyramid held aloft by wooden spars. The annotations explained that the wide canopy would catch the air. Leonardo da Vinci reasoned that increased surface area meant greater resistance, and that resistance could slow a falling body enough to avoid mortal impact. Leonardo's caption claimed such a device would enable a person to leap from any great height without injury. Yet no record indicated he ever constructed the canopy or stepped into the void to test it. His parachute remained a theoretical marvel, centuries ahead of contemporary technology. On the page, the dream of descending gently from the sky existed in full detail. In the real world, it still waited for someone willing to risk the fall. In the winter of 1783, France still thrilled to the smoky silhouettes of the Montgolfier brothers' balloons drifting above town squares and fields. The dream of conquering the air had moved from salons to public fairs, where crowds gathered to watch each new ascent. Within this atmosphere of daring experiment, attention turned from merely rising into the sky to confronting a more terrifying question: how a human being might return safely to the ground. In December 1783, Louis-Sébastien Lenormand, a Parisian-trained tailor of Austrian origin, climbed the tower of the Montpellier Observatory. In each hand, he held a rigid-framed canvas device, a sort of portable canopy braced by wooden ribs. Onlookers below craned their necks as he stepped off the parapet. Instead of plummeting, his descent visibly slowed. The air pressed against the fabric, spread his makeshift wings, and he reached the ground shaken, but without serious injury. Lenormand had not acted on impulse. Before his leap, he had released animals fitted with smaller versions from the tower, and he had already jumped himself from lesser heights inside the structure. In his writings, he used the word parachute, combining parer, to shield, with shoot, fall, and helped fix the term in scientific language. His demonstrations proved the principle, yet his parachute depended on fixed towers. The leap from buildings to open sky still waited in the future. In the closing years of the 18th century, the hot air balloon transformed the sky from distant mystery into a navigable realm and a new source of danger. Balloons drifted where the wind pushed them, unable to turn or stop at will. When flames misbehaved or storms rose ahead, one terrifying question hovered over every ascent. If the balloon went out of control, how could anyone possibly get back down alive? Jean-Pierre Blanchard, one of the era's most daring aeronauts, confronted that problem directly. In 1785, he crossed the English Channel by balloon with the American physician John Jeffries, proving that long-distance aerial voyages were possible. Blanchard soon experimented with parachutes, not for humans but for cargo and animals. Near Lille, witnesses recalled him releasing a dog fitted with a canvas parachute from a balloon. The animal landed unharmed, its descent visibly slowed. Pamphlets and engravings from the time showed strange devices: umbrella-like canopies, rigid frames, and capes of fabric, ideas midway between Louis-Sébastien Lenormand's tower jumps and André-Jacques Garnerin's later balloon-borne parachutes. These contraptions proved that falling bodies could be tamed, at least in theory. Yet no aeronaut willingly severed the last link to a balloon and trusted such a device with their own life. For now, the parachute remained an emergency dream, tested on animals, awaiting a bolder human trial. The story moved to early 17th century Prague and the wider Habsburg lands, where legends later whispered of a doomed parachute leap. In the surviving record, however, one figure stood out with clarity: Faust Vrancic, or Fausto Verancio, a Dalmatian scholar and engineer. While folktales sometimes confused him with other names, including Václav Prokop-Divish, archival traces pointed firmly to Vrancic as the mind behind one of the first detailed parachute designs. In 1615, Vrancic published his illustrated treatise, Machinae Novae. Among its many inventions appeared an engraving titled Homo Volans, the flying man. The image showed a figure hanging beneath a rigid square frame of fabric, stepping from a high structure. Later storytellers placed that tower in Venice or in Prague or on an unnamed bridge, but the book itself remained silent on any real trial. It offered only the drawing and a brief technical description. From this silence, later centuries spun a louder tale. 19th and 20th century writers increasingly claimed that the first parachute test had killed its inventor, and they sometimes pinned that tragic ending on Vrancic or on unnamed experimenters. Yet no contemporary report described such a fatal jump in Prague or anywhere else. The myth took shape instead from repetition: an evocative image, an absent eyewitness, and a public eager for a martyr of flight. The myth had grown in the space between images and sources. Early engravings showed vague, parachute-like contraptions and anonymous figures leaping from towers, yet almost never cited documents or names. 19th century encyclopedias repeated the tale of a certain inventor who supposedly tried such a device and died on impact. Each retelling blurred dates and locations until the story felt ancient and authoritative despite its lack of verifiable origin. As the legend circulated, it fused with the aura of Leonardo da Vinci. Some writers claimed, entirely without evidence, that he had personally tested a parachute and perished. His sketch of a pyramid-shaped canopy, drawn centuries earlier and never built in his lifetime, became retroactively transformed into a deadly experiment. Popular accounts rarely distinguished between design on paper and trials in the air, allowing speculation to masquerade as historical fact. When interest in powered flight surged around the turn of the 20th century, newspapers and popular science magazines eagerly recycled these stories. They shortened them, sharpened them, and sometimes added lurid details, cementing the idea of a single, doomed pioneer. Yet archival evidence told a different story. No clearly identified inventor was known to have died testing the very first true parachute of their own design. The tidy tragedy belonged to legend, not to the record. In the years leading to 1797, André-Jacques Garnerin immersed himself in the new science of ballooning. He attended ascents, observed gas management, and noted how baskets and envelopes behaved in turbulent air. In notebooks and reports, he calculated the surface area a canopy would need to create sufficient drag for a human body. He compared the weight and porosity of silk and canvas, searching for a fabric light enough to rise, yet strong enough to resist tearing. Garnerin studied earlier parachute concepts by Louis-Sébastien Lenormand and the balloon experiments of Jean-Pierre Blanchard. He proposed abandoning heavy, rigid frames in favor of a flexible, umbrella-like canopy folded under a hydrogen balloon's basket. His project moved through official channels. Permissions were issued by revolutionary authorities, and members of the Académie des Sciences prepared to observe. Minutes, letters, and printed notices showed that his descent was treated as a serious aeronautical trial, not mere spectacle. On 22 October 1797 in Paris, Garnerin rose beneath a balloon, his folded silk parachute attached below the basket. The canopy measured roughly 7 meters across, offering enough area to slow his expected fall to several meters per second. When he cut the cord, the parachute opened violently and then oscillated, swinging him in wide arcs because no vent hole stabilized the airflow. He landed shaken but alive, contradicting predictions of certain death and altering contemporary ideas about the limits of human flight. Garnerin's survival transformed the parachute from morbid curiosity into public sensation. In 1798, he repeated his daring descents over French fields, the white canopy billowing against the sky, while spectators followed on horseback and on foot. Each successful landing quieted skeptics who had predicted certain death. Newspapers reported every detail, from the jolting oscillations of the basket to the triumphant moment when the craft finally touched ground. By 1799, Garnerin carried his experiments to England. At Vauxhall Gardens in London, thousands crowded along the Thames, craning their necks as his balloon drifted overhead. When the parachute separated and opened cleanly, a collective gasp spread through the gardens. Observers noted how the canopy stabilized after an initial sway and how Garnerin adjusted ropes and basket position, turning each descent into a living laboratory in the open air. Amid these demonstrations, Jean-Geneviève Labrosse stepped into history. In 1799, she made a solo parachute jump, becoming one of the earliest recorded female parachutists, then continued performing descents into the early 1800s. Her flights, alongside Garnerin's, proved that parachuting did not depend on a single exceptional individual. Engineers studied the violent swinging they observed and began refining canopy shapes and adding vents, slowly transforming the parachute into a controllable tool of aerial navigation. By the mid-19th century, parachutes had drifted from bold experiment into popular spectacle. Traveling aeronauts crossed Europe and the United States, rising in gas balloons at fairs, expositions, and traveling shows. From swaying baskets, they cut loose beneath fabric canopies, descending toward cheering crowds in fields and city outskirts. Newspapers described these jumps as wonders of modern science, yet organizers treated them less as safety devices and more as daring attractions. Behind the fanfare, accidents accumulated. Poorly packed canopies sometimes failed to open. Balloons drifted too low for a safe release. Sudden gusts slammed parachutists into roofs, trees, or open water. Local newspapers in the 1880s and 1890s reported fatal falls by American jumpers whose names appeared briefly in obituaries and sensational headlines. Each death revealed weaknesses: flimsy harnesses, unreliable release mechanisms, and balloon pilots who misjudged altitude while crowds watched in horror. When powered flight emerged with the Wright brothers in 1903, the parachute's purpose slowly shifted from showmanship to survival. Military officials initially resisted issuing parachutes to pilots, fearing that easy escape would encourage abandoning valuable aircraft. Inventors such as Gleb Kotelnikov in Russia and Stefan Banach in the United States tested compact, body-worn designs that finally proved reliable. By World War I, many observation balloon crews carried parachutes, and documented rescues increasingly outnumbered deaths, overturning earlier fatalistic assumptions. By the end of the story, the historical record stood in quiet opposition to the title's claim. Leonardo da Vinci had sketched a pyramidal parachute, but it remained a thought experiment on paper. Faust Vrancic had printed his Homo volans, yet no contemporary account confirmed a real jump. Louis-Sébastien Lenormand had stepped from towers and survived. Jean-Pierre Blanchard had dropped animals from balloons, while André-Jacques Garnerin had landed alive in 1797, inaugurating documented human parachuting. Through the 19th and 20th centuries, designers had enlarged canopies, added vents, and eventually adopted modern harnesses and ripcords. Parachutes shifted from fragile curiosities to military essentials and sporting equipment. Still, the phrase, "the first parachute test killed its inventor," circulated in popular culture. It persisted because it echoed a familiar myth. The lone, doomed genius whose first attempt ended in tragedy, a simpler story than decades of cautious, incremental refinement. Real fatalities had occurred in the history of parachuting: test jumps gone wrong, combat descents under fire, and accidental failures during training. Those losses belonged to many individuals, not to a single, original martyr. In the end, the parachute emerged as a symbol of how narrative often overshadowed engineering. A device once imagined as a near-certain death sentence from the sky became, through data and iteration, a routine lifesaver in war, exploration, and spaceflight re-entry.